The rain hammered against the cracked pavement like 1,000 desperate fingers knocking on heaven's door. In the glow of a dying streetlight, a woman's trembling hand reached toward something that didn't belong in her world. A leather briefcase, abandoned, expensive, impossibly out of place among the puddles and garbage of the forgotten roadside, where she sold food to survive. Her fingers brushed against its surface, and in that single moment, everything she believed about right and wrong, about poverty and dignity, about the man she'd married 23 years ago, all of it would be thrown into a fire that would either forge them stronger or burn them to ash. Because when you've spent your entire life doing the right thing and still can't afford your mother's medicine, when your husband looks at you with eyes that have stopped dreaming, when one briefcase contains more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes, the question isn't what's right anymore. The question becomes, what are you willing to lose to stay who you are? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Grace Okonkwo, though most people in the Ajao estate neighborhood simply called her Mama G, or the woman with the good jollof rice. For 17 years, she'd operated a small food cart at the corner of a busy intersection, serving rice, beans, and stew to laborers, security guards, and anyone else scraping together enough naira for a hot meal. Her hands bore the scars of hot oil and steam burns. Her back ached from bending over pots, from dawn until the mosquitoes came out at dusk. But she'd built something, not wealth, never wealth, but a reputation. People knew that Mama G's portions were fair, her food was clean, and if you were short on money, she'd still make sure you didn't go hungry. The briefcase had appeared during the evening rush, around 7:30, when the sky had already surrendered to darkness and the rain was just beginning its nightly assault. Grace had been packing up her pots, her body moving through the familiar rhythm of exhaustion when she noticed it. Just sitting there, 15 feet from her cart, partially hidden behind a concrete barrier, as if someone had set it down for just a moment and then vanished. She'd stared at it for a full minute, her mind cataloging its foreignness. Rich brown leather, gold clasps, the kind of thing that belonged in air-conditioned offices, not on streets where children played in open sewers. Her first instinct had been to ignore it. Other people's problems were luxuries she couldn't afford. But then the rain intensified, and she thought about how angry she'd be if something precious to her was left out in the weather. And before she could talk herself out of it, she'd walked over and picked it up. It was heavy. Not book heavy, money heavy. Her heart had started hammering then, a drumbeat of warning and possibility that made her hands shake as she carried it back to her cart. She should take it to the police station. That was the right thing. That was what the Grace Okonkwo who prayed every Sunday and taught her nieces about honesty would do. But the police station was a 40-minute walk. The rain was getting worse, and her husband Samuel would be waiting at home, probably already irritated that dinner was late. So she'd made a decision that seemed small at the time. She wrapped the briefcase in a plastic bag, tucked it under her cart, and finished packing up. She'd deal with it tomorrow. She'd take it to the police first thing in the morning. It was just one night. What difference could one night make? The difference, she would learn, was everything. Samuel Okonkwo had been a different man when Grace married him. 23 years ago, he'd been full of plans. He was going to be an engineer. He was going to build things, change things, make enough money that his children would never know hunger. But Nigeria had other plans. The economy had collapsed. Jobs disappeared. His engineering degree became expensive paper. And somewhere between the third failed business venture and the 10th job rejection, the light in Samuel's eyes had gone out. Now he worked as a part-time mechanic, fixing other people's cars while their own family had never owned one, coming home each night smelling of motor oil and disappointment. When Grace arrived home that night, soaked through despite her umbrella, dragging the covered briefcase behind her, Samuel was sitting at their small kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills illuminated by the weak yellow light of their single bulb. He looked up, and she saw it immediately, that dangerous combination of frustration and resignation that had become his default expression. "You're late," he said, not angry, just stating a fact. "I found something," Grace replied, setting the briefcase on the table. "At the corner. Someone left it." Samuel's eyes narrowed. His practical mind was already working. "What is it?" "I don't know. I didn't open it." "Why not?" "Because it's not ours." Something flickered across Samuel's face, an emotion Grace couldn't quite name. He reached for the briefcase, his calloused mechanic's hand surprisingly gentle as he examined the clasps. They weren't locked. Whoever had abandoned this hadn't even secured it properly, as if they'd been in a terrible hurry. "We should see what's inside," Samuel said quietly, "to know what we're dealing with." Grace wanted to say no, wanted to say they should just take it straight to the authorities, sight unseen. But Samuel's logic made sense. What if it was dangerous? What if it contained something illegal? Shouldn't they at least know before involving the police? She nodded. Samuel opened the briefcase. The money was organized in neat stacks, bound with paper bands that had bank logos printed on them. Underneath the cash were documents, property deeds, investment certificates, business contracts, and clipped to the inside of the lid was a business card. Chief Adebayo Ogunle, CEO, Ogunle Industries. A phone number, an email address. Grace felt the room tilt. She recognized that name. Everyone in Lagos recognized that name. Chief Ogunle was one of those billionaires whose face appeared in newspapers, whose construction projects reshaped the skyline, whose charitable donations made headlines. This wasn't just anyone's briefcase. This was the briefcase of a man who could buy and sell their entire neighborhood without noticing the expense. "Sweet Jesus," Samuel whispered. Grace's hands were shaking again. "We need to call him, right now. We need to—" "Wait." Samuel's voice had changed. Gone was the defeated mechanic. In his place was something Grace hadn't seen in years. Alertness, calculation, hunger. "Just wait, let's think about this." "Think about what?" "Samuel, this is— how much do you think is here?" Grace stared at her husband. "It doesn't matter how much. It matters." Samuel pulled out one of the stacks, his fingers trembling as he counted. "Each stack is 50,000 naira, and there are—" He counted quickly, his breathing getting faster. "Grace, there's over 5 million naira here, maybe more. And these documents, these are property deeds worth tens of millions." The number hit Grace like a physical blow. 5 million naira. The amount felt obscene, impossible. That was more than she'd make in 20 years of selling food. That was her mother's medical bills paid in full. That was the roof they needed to fix. That was the school fees for her brother's children. That was security, stability, a future that didn't involve wondering if they'd have enough for next week's food. "Samuel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't be thinking what I think you're thinking." Her husband looked up at her, and in his eyes was a desperation so raw it made her heart crack. "Why not? Why can't I think it? This man, this billionaire, he has everything. Everything, Grace. He probably spends 5 million naira on lunch, on shoes. He won't even miss this. But for us, this changes our lives. This gives us back everything the world has taken from us. It's not ours. Nothing is ours." Samuel's voice rose. 23 years of frustration suddenly pouring out. We work, and we struggle, and we pray, and we do everything right. And what do we have? A leaking roof, debts we can't pay, your mother dying because we can't afford the good hospital. When does it become our turn, Grace? When do we get to stop suffering? Grace felt tears burning in her eyes, because she understood. God help her, she understood exactly what Samuel was feeling, because she felt it too. The exhaustion of virtue. The weight of always choosing the hard right over the easy wrong, the quiet rage at a world that seemed to reward corruption and punish honesty. "This is stealing," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is surviving," Samuel countered. "Rich people lose money all the time, and nothing happens to them. They write it off. They claim insurance. They move on. But people like us, we don't get second chances. This is our one chance, Grace. Our only chance." He stood up, walked around the table, took his wife's hands in his. His touch was gentle, pleading. "I'm not a bad man. You know I'm not. I've worked every day of my life. I've tried to provide. But the system is broken, Grace. It's broken, and people like us can't fix it. Maybe this is the universe trying to balance the scales. Maybe this is our blessing finally arriving." If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section. Grace pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked at the briefcase, at the money that represented everything they'd never had. Then at her husband, the man she'd loved since she was 19 years old. The man who used to make her laugh. The man who'd held her when they buried their first child. A daughter who died at 3 months because they couldn't afford the hospital. The man who'd slowly been crushed under the weight of poverty until something essential inside him had broken. "I need to think," she said. I need time." Samuel's jaw tightened. Time for what? Time to talk yourself into doing the right thing that keeps us poor forever? Time to convince yourself that suffering is somehow noble? Time to pray. I'm tired of praying, Grace. I'm tired of hoping God will fix things while we keep drowning. Maybe God helps those who help themselves. Maybe this is Him helping us, and we're too blind with fake righteousness to see it. The argument continued deep into the night, their voices rising and falling like the rain outside. Samuel presented his case with the precision of a lawyer. They weren't criminals. They were just unlucky people accepting a lucky break. No one would know. They'd be careful with the money, spend it slowly, claim it came from savings or a small inheritance. Chief Ogunlai probably had insurance. Rich people always had insurance. Grace countered with morality, with principles, with the kind of person she'd promised herself she'd never become. But with each argument, she felt her resolve weakening, because Samuel kept bringing up truths she couldn't deny. Her mother did need surgery. They did have debts. Their landlord had threatened eviction just last week. And yes, 5 million naira would solve every immediate problem crushing them. By midnight, they'd reached an exhausted stalemate. The briefcase sat on the table between them, like a third presence in their marriage. Silent, powerful, judging. "Sleep on it," Samuel finally said. "That's all I ask. Sleep on it, and in the morning, if you still want to give it back, we will. I promise. But just give yourself one night to imagine what life could be like, what our life could be like. Please." Grace nodded, too tired to argue anymore. They went to bed in silence, lying next to each other without touching, each lost in their own thoughts. But Grace didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from passing headlights play across the cracked plaster, and she let herself imagine. No more pain in her back from bending over cooking pots. No more fear when bills arrived. No more watching her mother's health deteriorate because the good medicine was too expensive. No more seeing that look of defeat in Samuel's eyes. Freedom. Security. Peace. It would be so easy. Who would even know? She could call the police in the morning, report finding the briefcase, and by then, it would be empty. By then, the money would be hidden, already working its way into their lives through careful, untraceable spending. Chief Ogunlai was a billionaire. He'd be angry for a day, maybe a week, but then he'd move on. Rich people always moved on. They had cushions, buffers, safety nets. People like Grace and Samuel had nothing to catch them when they fell. Around 3 a.m, Grace got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The briefcase was still there, waiting. She opened it again, ran her fingers over the stacks of money. It felt real. Solid. More real than any blessing she'd ever prayed for. She thought about her mother, who'd raised 5 children alone after Grace's father died, who'd sold everything she owned to make sure those children got educated, who was now suffering because the diabetes medicine that worked cost too much. What kind of daughter let her mother suffer when she had 5 million naira sitting in front of her? She thought about her marriage. Samuel wasn't a bad man. He was a broken man, broken by a world that demanded everything and gave nothing back. Maybe this money could fix him. Maybe this money could bring back the man she'd married, the one who used to dream. But then she thought about her food cart, about the customers who trusted her, about the reputation she'd built one honest transaction at a time, about the girl who'd once come to her stall crying because she'd been cheated by another vendor, and how Grace had given her a free meal and her mother's advice. In this world full of thieves, someone has to choose to be different. Was she different? Or had she just never been tested hard enough? Dawn came without revelation. Grace was still sitting at the kitchen table, the briefcase open before her, when Samuel emerged from the bedroom. He looked at her face and knew. The battle wasn't over. "Grace," he started. "I'm going to find him," she interrupted. "Chief Ogunlai, I'm going to find him and return this." Samuel's face hardened. "No. It's not our money, Samuel. It's our chance." His fist hit the table, making the briefcase jump. "You're willing to throw away our one opportunity because of what? Pride? Some fantasy about cosmic justice? Wake up, Grace. Nobody is coming to save us. God is not going to drop money from heaven. This is our miracle, and you want to give it back? I want to be able to sleep at night. I want to be able to eat," Samuel shouted back. "I want to be able to take care of my wife. I want to stop feeling like a failure every single day of my life." His voice cracked on the last word, and Grace saw tears on his face. The first time she'd seen her husband cry in a decade. It broke something inside her. "I'm 51 years old," Samuel continued, his voice dropping to a broken whisper. 51. And I have nothing. I own nothing. I am nothing. Every morning I wake up and the first thought in my head is, what's the point? I look at my life and I see waste. Wasted potential. Wasted dreams. Wasted years. And I feel it killing me, Grace. Not fast. Slow. Like dying of thirst while watching. Other people swim in pools of water they didn't earn and don't deserve. And now, when something finally falls into our hands, when the universe finally shows us mercy, you want to give it back. To a man who already has everything. To a man who will never even notice it's gone. Grace reached across the table, took her husband's hands. They were shaking. "I know you're hurting. You don't know," Samuel pulled away. "You have your food cart. You have your purpose. You have people who respect you, who need you. What do I have? I fix cars in other people's garages. I am a university-educated man who spends his days changing oil and being spoken to like a houseboy by men half my age who bought their positions with daddy's money. Every day I swallow my pride. Every day I accept disrespect. Every day I come home and see you working yourself to death, and I can't do anything to help. Do you understand what that does to a man? Grace did understand. She'd watched it happen. Watched the man she loved slowly collapse under the weight of a rigged system. And a terrible part of her wondered, if keeping this money was wrong, why did returning it feel like she was losing her husband? "Give me the card," she said quietly. "What?" "The business card. Chief Ogunlai's card. If I'm going to return this, I need to contact him." Samuel's face went through several emotions: disbelief, betrayal, rage, and finally, a cold hardness that frightened Grace more than his anger. "You're really going to do this? You're really going to choose a stranger over your own family?" "I'm choosing what's right." "Right," Samuel laughed bitterly. "You know what's right, Grace. Right is that billionaires pay taxes while we starve. Right is that honest workers get rewarded while thieves get elected. Right is that your mother should have access to health care, that our daughter should have survived, that 23 years of hard work should amount to more than this," he gestured around their small, shabby kitchen. "But none of that is right. None of that is how the world works. So don't talk to me about right. Talk to me about survival." He stood up, grabbed his jacket. "I'm going to work. When I come back tonight, I want to know what you decided." "Because I'm done, Grace. I'm done living like this. If you give that money back, I don't know what happens to us. I honestly don't know if I can stay married to someone who would choose poverty over peace when given the choice. Think about that while you're being righteous." He left. The door closed with a finality that made Grace's stomach turn. She sat alone with the briefcase for another hour, turning the business card over in her hands. The old Nokia phone on the counter seemed to mock her. One call could end this. One call to return the briefcase. One call to preserve who she was. But it would cost her everything else. Instead of calling, Grace did something else. She opened the documents in the briefcase and started reading. The property deeds were for multiple buildings, commercial complexes, residential towers, shopping centers. The investment certificates represented shares in companies she'd heard of, massive corporations that employed thousands. The contracts were for construction projects, infrastructure development, deals worth hundreds of millions of naira. And slowly, Grace began to form a picture of Chief Adebayo Ogunle, not as an abstract billionaire, but as a real person with real responsibilities. These weren't just papers. They represented jobs, livelihoods, futures. Thousands of people depended on these projects continuing. And without these documents, without the authorization and proof they contained, those projects could stall. People could lose their positions. Families could suffer, just like hers was suffering. The realization didn't make Grace feel better. It made everything more complicated. Because now she couldn't pretend this was just money that wouldn't be missed. This was essential. This was important. This loss probably had Chief Ogunlai and dozens of his employees in crisis right now, scrambling to replace documents, to prove ownership, to keep their business functioning. And she was sitting in her kitchen, deciding whether to help or hinder them. Grace picked up the phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to dial twice. The phone rang 4 times, and she was about to hang up when a voice answered. Female, professional, clipped with stress. "Chief Ogunlai's office." "Who is this?" Grace's mouth went dry. My name is Grace Okonkwo. I think I found something that belongs to Chief Ogunlai." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "The briefcase? You found the briefcase?" "Yes." "Oh, thank God. Thank God. Hold on, please, hold on." The woman's voice moved away from the phone, shouting to someone else. "She found it! Someone found it!" Then back to Grace. "Ma, where are you? Can you bring it to our office? We've been searching everywhere." The chief is beside himself. "Those documents. We need those documents desperately. There's a major deal closing tomorrow, and without those contracts..." She stopped herself. "I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you come today? We're in Victoria Island. I can send a car. I'll bring it myself," Grace heard herself say. "This afternoon. I'll bring it this afternoon." She hung up before the woman could ask more questions, before she could change her mind. The decision was made. She was returning it. She was doing the right thing. So why did she feel like she was drowning? The rest of the morning passed in a daze. Grace didn't open her food cart. She couldn't imagine standing there serving rice while her entire life was falling apart. Instead, she cleaned the house, a desperate attempt to control something, anything. She scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing. She organized shelves that were already organized. She did anything to avoid thinking about Samuel's face when he'd left, about the promise she'd broken by choosing morality over their marriage. Around noon, her phone rang. It was her younger sister, Ngozi. "Grace, what's wrong? You didn't open the cart today. People are asking for you." Grace almost laughed. In the middle of this moral crisis, in the middle of her marriage potentially ending, people were worried about where to get their lunch. The mundane absurdity of it struck her hard. "I'm not feeling well," she lied. "Do you need me to come over?" No, I just need rest." But Ngozi knew her too well. "Grace, talk to me. What's really happening?" And suddenly, Grace was crying. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken inside her. And through the tears, she told Ngozi everything. The briefcase, the money, Samuel's reaction, the choice she was facing. Ngozi listened in silence until Grace finished, then said quietly, "What does your heart tell you?" "My heart is confused." "No, it's not. You know what you want to do. You're just afraid of the cost." "The cost is my marriage." "Maybe," Ngozi said. "Or maybe the cost of keeping that money is your soul. And maybe Samuel needs to see that some things matter more than money. Maybe that's a lesson he needs to learn, even if it's hard. And if he leaves me, then he was already gone, and you just hadn't admitted it yet." The words hit like a punch, because Grace knew, had known for years, that the man Samuel had become wasn't the man she'd married. Poverty hadn't just taken their money. It had taken pieces of them both. It had turned Samuel bitter and desperate. It had made Grace so tired that sometimes she forgot what joy felt like. But giving in to desperation wouldn't bring joy back. It would just make them different kinds of broken. At 2:00, Grace put on her best dress, a faded blue wrapper and blouse that she wore to church, and carefully repacked the briefcase. Every movement felt heavy, significant. She was choosing something. Not just about money, about who she was, about what kind of life she wanted to lead, even if that life was hard. The journey to Victoria Island took 2 hours by bus, the briefcase clutched in her lap the entire time. She watched Lagos flow past the window, the chaos, the poverty, the wealth, all existing side by side in uncomfortable proximity. She saw women like herself, street vendors and market traders, fighting for survival. She saw the gleaming cars of people who'd never worry about next month's rent. And she wondered, for the 1,000th time, how the world had become so unequal, and whether her small act of honesty would make any difference at all. Chief Ogunlai's office building was everything Grace expected. Glass and steel, air-conditioned lobbies, security guards in crisp uniforms. She felt completely out of place, this tired woman in her church dress carrying a briefcase that had probably cost more than her yearly income. But when she gave her name at reception, Everything changed. The guard's bored expression transformed to shock. "You're the one who found— Wait here, please, wait right here." Within minutes, Grace was being escorted to the top floor, through corridors with expensive art on the walls, past offices where people in suits talked on phones about millions like they were discussing groceries. And then she was in a conference room, and Chief Adebayo Ogunle himself was standing up from a massive table, walking toward her with an expression Grace couldn't quite read. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 60, with gray at his temples and worry lines around his eyes. And those eyes, they were exhausted, stressed, profoundly relieved. "Mrs. Okonkwo?" His voice was deep, warm, human. Grace nodded, held out the briefcase. "I found this last night, near a Ajao estate. I'm returning it." Chief Ogunle took the briefcase, opened it, quickly verified the contents. Then he looked back at Grace, and she was shocked to see his eyes were wet. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. "Do you know what these documents represent?" "I read some of them," Grace admitted. "Contracts, property deeds, important things." "Important doesn't begin to cover it." Chief Ogunle set the briefcase down, ran a hand over his face. "Without these, a development project that would create 5,000 jobs was going to collapse. Hundreds of families were going to lose their livelihoods. I've been sick with worry since I realized it was gone. My driver, he set it down for one moment while helping me into the car during the rain, and when he turned back, it had vanished. We thought it was stolen. We thought." He stopped, composed himself. "Mrs. Okonkwo, there was cash in there. Did you count it?" "Yes." "And you brought it all back?" "Yes." "Why?" The question hung in the air. Grace thought about Samuel, about their argument, about the life she could have had if she'd made a different choice. And she thought about the woman who'd taught her daughter to always choose the harder, right over the easier wrong, even when no one was watching. "Because it wasn't mine," she said simply. Chief Ogunle was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "My father was a taxi driver. Did you know that? Worked 16 hours a day to put me through university. Died at 53 from stress and exhaustion. I built all of this." He gestured around the office. "Because he taught me that integrity matters. That how you earn success matters as much as the success itself. And somewhere along the way, I started to forget that. Started to think everyone was corrupt. Everyone was looking for shortcuts. You've reminded me why my father's lesson mattered. You've reminded me that people like you still exist." He pulled out a checkbook. "I'm going to give you a reward, something significant. You've saved my company, saved thousands of jobs." "No." Grace's voice was firm. "No reward. Please." Chief Ogunle blinked in surprise. "Mrs. Okonkwo, if you give me money, it changes what I did. It makes it transactional. I didn't do this for a reward. I did it because it was right. Please let me keep that." There was a long silence. Then Chief Ogunle nodded slowly. "I understand. But may I ask what you do for a living?" "I sell food at a street corner in a Ajao estate." "And business is good?" Grace almost laughed. "Business keeps me alive. That's about all I can say." Chief Ogunle studied her for a moment, then pulled out his phone, made a call. "Get me the file on the Ajao estate development, the commercial ground floor units. Yes, now." He hung up, turned back to Grace. "I'm building a shopping complex in your area. Modern, secure, with proper utilities, and foot traffic. It opens in 3 months. I'm going to reserve a unit for you. Rent-free for the first year, subsidized after that. A real restaurant space, not a street cart. You can build something. Something sustainable." Grace's breath caught. "Chief, I can't." "You're not taking my money. You're taking an opportunity. What you build with it is up to you. That's the difference." He smiled, Besides, I'm a businessman. I'm investing in someone I know has integrity. That's rare enough to be valuable." Tears were streaming down Grace's face now, not because of the opportunity, though it was life-changing, but because someone saw her, really saw her, saw the struggle and the choice and the cost. "Thank you," she whispered. "No, Mrs. Okonkwo, thank you. You could have taken 5 million naira, and I would never have found you. Instead, you gave me back something worth far more than money. You gave me back faith." Grace left the building in a daze, her hands empty but her heart fuller than it had been in years. The briefcase was gone. The money was gone. The temptation was gone. And what remained was who she'd always been. A woman who chose right even when it cost everything. But she still had to go home and face Samuel. She found him sitting in the same place she'd left him that morning, at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where the briefcase had been. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes went immediately to her empty hands. "You did it," he said flatly. "You actually did it." "Samuel, don't." He held up a hand. "I don't want to hear about how good it felt or how right it was. I don't want to hear about sleeping well at night. I want you to understand what you've done. You've chosen poverty, actively chosen it, for both of us." "I chose integrity." "Integrity doesn't pay for your mother's medicine," Samuel shouted, standing up so fast his chair fell backward. "Integrity doesn't fix our roof. Integrity doesn't save us from eviction. Integrity is a luxury for people who can afford it, and we can't." "A man offered me a restaurant," Grace said quietly. Samuel stopped mid-rant. "What?" "Chief Ogunlai, the man who owned the briefcase. He's giving me a proper restaurant space in a new shopping complex, rent-free for a year. This could change everything for us, Samuel, for our business, our future." She watched her husband's face cycle through emotions, surprise, hope, and then something darker. Suspicion. "How much did you tell him?" Samuel asked slowly. "About us? About our situation?" "He asked what I did for a living. I told him." "And you expect me to believe that some billionaire just decided to give you a restaurant out of the goodness of his heart?" "Grace, he's buying you. He's buying your silence, so you don't tell people he lost 5 million naira like a careless fool. You think this is generosity? It's damage control." Grace felt something inside her crack. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why can't you just let this be good? Why does everything have to be corrupted, twisted into something ugly? Because that's how the world works." Samuel's voice was raw. "Nobody gives without taking. Nobody helps without an agenda. I've lived long enough to know." "You've lived long enough to become bitter," Grace shouted back, surprised by her own anger. "You've lived long enough to let poverty poison you. And you know what? I understand. I understand how hard it's been, how unfair, how exhausting. But I won't let it turn me into someone who can't recognize genuine kindness. I won't let it make me into someone who steals." "It wasn't stealing." "Yes, it was." Grace was crying now, years of frustration pouring out. "It was stealing, Samuel. And the worst part is that I almost did it. I almost kept that money because I'm tired. I'm so tired of struggling. So tired of watching you suffer. So tired of not being able to help my mother. But you know what would have been worse? Becoming someone I couldn't recognize in the mirror. Becoming someone our daughter would have been ashamed of." The mention of their daughter, their dead baby, girl, hit Samuel like a physical blow. He staggered back, sat down hard on the floor, and put his face in his hands. "I don't know who I am anymore," he said, his voice muffled. "I look at my life and I don't recognize it. This isn't what I planned. This isn't who I was supposed to be." Grace sat down beside him on the floor, their shabby kitchen floor, with its cracked tiles and stains, that wouldn't come out no matter how hard she scrubbed. She took his hand. "None of us are who we planned to be," she said gently. "Life took things from us. Terrible things. Our daughter. Our dreams. Our security. But Samuel, we can't let it take our decency too. Because that's all we really have left. That's all we really own. And if we lose that, then poverty wins. Completely." Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I wanted to keep the money because I wanted to give you something. After all these years of failing to provide, I wanted to give you security. Peace. A life without struggle. I know. But you gave it back anyway. Because I'd rather struggle with a good man than live comfortably with a stranger. And Samuel, keeping that money, would have made us strangers. To ourselves and each other." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his eyes. Not resignation exactly, not surrender, but recognition. A slow, painful acknowledgement that she was right. "This restaurant space," he said finally. "Is it real? Or were you just trying to make me feel better?" "It's real. He's sending contracts next week." Samuel nodded slowly. Okay. Then we'll make it work. We'll build something. Together. The right way." It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. There were no soaring declarations or passionate embraces. But when Samuel squeezed her hand and didn't let go, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile, uncertain, but real. They sat on that kitchen floor for a long time, two people who'd almost lost, themselves finding their way back through the hardest path possible. And when they finally stood up, when they started talking about the future, about the restaurant, about the possibilities, about starting over, it felt like breathing after being underwater. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Grace knew that. Samuel's bitterness wouldn't disappear overnight. Her exhaustion wouldn't magically vanish. They'd still face struggles, still have bills they couldn't pay, still watch wealthier people take shortcuts they refused to take. But they'd face it as themselves, as the people they'd chosen to be. 3 months later, Grace's restaurant opened in the new Ajao Estate shopping complex. It was small but clean, with proper ventilation, running water, and enough space for actual tables instead of just a cart. Samuel had helped set it up, his mechanical skills finally put to use, building something for their own future. And on opening day, when the first customers came in and complimented the food, when people from the old street corner showed up to support Mama G in her new location, Grace felt something she'd almost forgotten. Pride. Not in what she had, in who she was. Chief Ogunlai came to the opening, not for publicity. He refused photos, but to shake her hand and say, "See, integrity builds empires. It just takes longer than shortcuts." Grace thought about the briefcase sometimes, about the 5 million naira she could have kept, about the different life she could be living, and she'd be lying if she said she never wondered what if. But then she'd look at Samuel, who was slowly becoming himself again, slowly learning to dream again, and she'd know. The what-if life would have been comfortable. But this life, the hard one, the honest one, this life was hers. And that made all the difference. If this story moved your heart in some way, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We share more stories about real choices, real struggles, and real people trying to do right in a complicated world. Drop a comment and let us know. What would you have done with the briefcase? Your perspective matters, and we'd love to hear it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, sometimes the heaviest thing we carry isn't what we take, but what we choose to give back.